So, pranam to all of you. Good afternoon from Argentina, from Gudrum, here in the island. Very happy to share with you again, starting a new week with our series of lectures connected to Raga-vartma-candrika. If possible, as I remind you last week, maybe you may turn off your video so the streaming is as best as possible, since the connection here is not so powerful. Let's see how it works today. So we are today in our meeting number 25. Today is the third part of our study of the sixth verse or prose from the second illumination of the Raga-vartma-candrika, and I think it will be the last one, this sixth verse or prose. So let's make some brief recap of what we were studying last Thursday, which was the second part that we dedicated for this sixth verse of this second illumination of this moon ray, which sheds lights on the path of Raga. So in our previous study, in the previous class, our main focus was about the concept of the bondage of love. The same way that we know about the bondage without love, because of lack of love, there is a certain specific bondage because of love's presence, especially in the context of Krishna and the Brajavasis. That's the main topic. So Vishwanath was given this example, this parallel, mentioning how in the same way that ignorance is binding up to conditioned souls with the ropes of mamata or possessiveness, bestowing on them simply misery, and in the same way, just as prisoners are bound up with ropes and chains, which give them much pain, similarly, and now he goes to the other analogy, the body of a respectable person is bound up by valuable, pleasurable, thin clothes, like a shirt on a turban. In the same way, the conditioned soul ignorance leads to his misery, and Sri Krishna's so-called ignorance will make him very happy because he's controlled by prem, bondage of love again. And he concludes this section saying, Sri Krishna enjoys great happiness in being covered over by prem, just, and a very beautiful analogy here, just as a bumblebee feels very pleasant in being enclosed in the world of the lotus flower. And therefore it is said, O Lord, you don't leave the lotus-like heart of your own devotees. And it is also said, devotees bound your lotus feet with the ropes of their love. So here Vishwanath, in this section, is concluding this topic, the topic of how the bondage of Prem is giving Krishna the highest levels of joy. He was already speaking about these ideas in previous sections. And he concludes this point in particular giving these examples. On one side, example of the chains, being bonded by chains and suffering misery because of that, and another one being so-called bonded by garlands and beautiful clothing and experiencing joy. No? So if we have the two bondings here, the bonding of Maya Shakti, the bonding of Swarup Shakti of Prem. And in order to further illustrate this point, this is the last one, how Krishna becomes intoxicated in the embrace of the Brajavasis love. He shares another very nice analogy, which is this drunken bumblebee who is trapped inside the lotus, but is happy being trapped there, drinking nectar without end. Madhusudan Krishna, the bumblebee-like Krishna, who is a bumblebee in the Brajavasis lotus heart. The heart of the Brajavasis is compared to the lotus, and Krishna as a bumblebee is compared to being trapped inside there, drinking all their honey, all their nectar, all their prem. And to further substantiate this, Vishwanath quotes here two brief lines of two verses from the Bhagavad to give further support, which show how Krishna, both Krishna and the Brajavasis are mutually actually bumblebees and lotuses to each other, if you will. The analogy can apply in both directions. One will be the Ashraya and the Vishaya, but also in the other direction, the other one will be the Vishaya and the Ashraya of each other. So he wants to make this important point. Krishna is controlled by the love of his devotees, and that's Krishna's favorite quality in himself. That's the thing that he loves most in his own personality, being a slave of his devotees, no more free will, if you will, no second choice. I mean, he never had free will in that context, because eternally, both him and the Brajavasis are eternally choosing to love each other. So for us here, free will means I can choose between Maya Shakti and Krishna. Once I chose properly, there's no second option. But inside that eternal choice, there will be, of course, lots of diversity and lots of individuality to be expressed. So then Vishwanath continued, mentioning that just as one experiences in this world the 5 kinds of misery, another analogy from this world to the other, just as one experiences 5 kinds of misery here, to a greater or lesser extent according to the degree to which one is bonded or covered over by ignorance. In so various degrees of prema, similarly, of course not the same, similarly, various degrees of prema will cover the knowledge and opulence, aishwarya, of both object and subject, vishaya and ashraya, to a greater or lesser extent, expanding innumerable varieties of divine ecstasy according to the level of their love. He gives the example. He says, that's the love of Yashoda and other Brajavasis, who are the ashraya of Prem, in connection to Krishna being the Vishaya. That love of the Brajavasis binds their object, their Vishaya, Krishna, with the ropes of mamata, of possessiveness, and vice versa, as we mentioned. By their mutual love, both Vishaya and Ashraya bring one another under control, thus showing an excess of joy upon both. And then he makes the strategic contrast. On the other hand, that prem that is mixed with awareness of the Lord's great opulence found in Vasudev, Devaki, and other residents of Mathura and Dwarka is not capable of bestowing such happiness upon Sri Krishna and his devotees. So he keeps further pounding the post here, bringing more, sharing more analogies, starting from our own experience in this world, the world of our experience, our Nara Lila, if you will, our Shristri Lila actually, versus his divine, transhuman Nara Lila. So he quotes first the 5 kleshas that famously Patanjali mentioned in the Yoga Sutras, Asmita and so on, Raga, Dvesha, etc. So he mentions in the same way that due to the covering of ignorance, avidya, this type of misery comes because of the influence of Maya Shakti. We have premas, the covering of prema, which covers all Aishwarya in both Vishaya and Ashraya. In the context of the mamata of prem, of the possessiveness that appears in divine love from one heart to the other. So that can flow without interruption of Aishwarya, of awareness, of Godhood in both directions. So in this way, Vishwanath describes this scenario as being mutually controlled through these ropes, this bondage of mindness, of powerful transcendental sense of Krishna is my friend, my son, my loved, and so on, and vice versa. Krishna will reciprocate accordingly. And how all this type of mindness is way above the experience of the Puravasis, urban devotees like Vasudeva, Devaki, and so on. And the last section that we shared last class, we extended for a while, and maybe today it may be similar, but he concluded our previous class. We concluded our previous class sharing further words by Vishwanath. He mentioned that therefore, Sri Krishna being bewildered by the maternal love of Rajeshwari Yashoda, he does not know about his own godhood. And when some disturbance is caused by a demon or by a forest fire, then Krishna manifests his omniscience, but that will be only for the sake of protecting such devotees, for the Brajavasis. And thus the Lila Shakti will cause him to momentarily display that omniscience. And previously, he gives some previous reference, it was already explained that his inconceivable potency enables him to be omniscient in order to accept the service offered to him by the practicing devotees, even when he is bewildered by loving bliss. He goes back to the topics of Mugdata and Sarvajñata, bewildered and omniscient. So here Vishwanath continues trying to establish his point from different perspectives. In this case, he brings up this question, how the bewildered Braja Krishna remains aware of his godhood, even while simultaneously exhibiting Aishwarya for certain purposes. He remains unaware, for his godhood in the midst of being mugdata, bewildered, but sometimes Aishwarya comes with purposes in the context of his mukta in the context of his love to the Brajavasis, protecting them, whatever, certain purposes. And omniscience will be there only for the protection of the Brajavasis, for Krishna protecting his mother, his friends. That's how he will experience that subjectively. So the point, this is the point. He gives this reminder, Vishwanath, here. When Krishna remains muktata, bewildered, the potency of a mission may be seen in him for accepting the worship of the sadhakas. Remember that he began some verses ago, the whole section with this, the whole second section. Who will hear the prayers of the Raganuga sadhakas if Krishna is so bewildered? So he mentioned he's bewildered, but some omniscience is there, of course, in him. It doesn't mean that he's aware of everything at every moment in the Braja Lila. So, and this apparent contradiction is harmonized with his Achintya Shakti or Yogamaya. We spent some time at the end of our previous class speaking about Yogamaya, different functions of Yogamaya, Vimukha and Mukha Mohini, some Bhagavad verses about that. Brajavasis considering themselves ordinary because of her influence, considering other realms as superior like Vaikuntha, above Vrindavan, but still attached to Vrindavan above everything. We spoke about the Chatushlokya of the Bhagavatam and how this Yogamaya takes the form, if you will, personified form of Purnamasi, Vrinda Devi, especially in Vrindavan, and how in Navadvip this takes the name and form of called Prodamaya as well, affecting Mahaprabhu in the context of the particular mood of Gaur Lila. And also I share with you some, if you wanted to go further into the idea of Yogamaya, I share one Bhagavad verse with Vishwanath commentary as a homework if you would like to read it. So I hope you have the chance of doing that. So after this not so brief recap, we will continue today with the last part of the 6th verse or prose of this second section of the Raga-vartma-candrika. So today, the main topic, although Vishwanath will speak here and there about certain things, mainly in the spirit of doing further recap of what he presented in the last section, main topic will be connected to the controversial, if you will, or thorny topic of Swakiya and Parakiya. And of course, Vishwanath will make his point very clearly, as you will see. But we'll speak about that in a few minutes. So I will share with you the first section here in the chat for you to have it. It's there. So let me read it. This says like this. In this way, I have expounded a philosophical deliberation on Vidhi Marga and Raga Marga, the Lord's aspects of Aishwarya and Madhurya, and his devotees' awareness of these aspects, what's called Aishwarya Gyan and Madhurya Gyan. The philosophy of Swakiya and Parakiya Bhav has been elaborately explained in my commentary on Ujjvala Nilamani. So here we see Vishwanath is reaching the end of his treatise. Still we have 2 more verses. There will be verse 7 and 8, but he's entering into the final section. So before turning to another topic in the 7th verse or prose, it's a different topic than what he has been elaborating on in this second illumination. Of course, the topic won't be altogether different. Somehow will be connected. He will speak about the necessity of being born in the Prakat Lila in order to attain the Aprakat and so on. So before entering into that, if you will, new section, Vishwanath here is briefly summarizing, very quickly actually, the whole book, what he has already explained till now, both in his first illumination and the second illumination. So he mentions how he has described the different details between Vaidhi Bhakti, Raga Bhakti, between Bhagavan's Aishwarya and Madhurya, these concepts of, in the context of speaking about also Mugdhata and Sarvajñata, bewilderment and omniscience, and also how the devotees, analyzing the perspective of the devotees, their Aishwarya Gyan or Madhurya Gyan, their level of awareness and how Bhagavan reciprocates to them. And regarding this last point, I should recall this important point about the tension between Madhurya and Aishwarya, sweetness and majesty. It's very important to deal with this art. The whole Bhagavatam is holding this tension together between Madhurya and Aishwarya in a very artful way. Vyasadev, Srila Vyasa is trying, of course, the main point of his Bhagavad is to speak to us about the sweetness of the absolute of Bhagavan. But in order for us to reach that Madhurya experience, as you know, we cannot reach that without first hearing and going through his majesty, understanding the Aishwarya in the background. And Sukadev Goswami at the same time he's dealing with this in his narrative of the Braja Lila to Parikshit, in between of the most intimate pastimes of Krishna and Braj, invoking names, Aishwaric names, like Bhagavan, Ishwar, Yogeshwar, like reminding Vishnu, Vikriditam Brajavadhu Viridam Cha Vishnu, and so on. He's God, like walking in the tightrope of this Aishwarya and Madhurya. Guru Maharaj said once in this regard, he said, if only the sweetness of the Absolute is presented in this context, everything will be lost. If we only speak about in terms of Madhurya without connecting that with Aishwarya, everything, the whole narrative of the intimacy of the Bhagavad will be seen as ordinary. And if only its majesty is stressed, the book will hold no charm at all. It will be overtly too much Aishwaric. Thus, he says, on the canvas of Aishwarya, Vyasa masterfully paints a picture of Krishna's Madhurya. So very nicely he depicts this. Like sometimes he says, Tattva Siddhanta is like the canvas on which the art of Krishna Lila is drawn. So this is a similar idea. Aishwarya had to do with knowledge of Godhood, Tattva Siddhanta, that awareness, that's a canvas. And Vyasa in the Bhagavad, he's painting the picture of Krishna's Madhurya on that canvas, on that backdrop. And also once Guru Maharaj made the connection, extending that idea from the Bhagavad into the, if you will, Chaitanya Bhagavad, into the Gaur Lila, by quoting the famous Namaskar Shloka from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Vande Sri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito, Godadai Pushpavantu Chitra Sandrotamonudo. So he mentions there how Gaur Nitai appeared together on Goda Udai, the eastern horizon of Goda. Goda has to do with the word Gaudiya Vaishnavism comes from Goda. Sometimes people may say, but to say Gaudiya Vaishnavism is like to imply a geographical designation to your doctrine. It's like saying American Christianity or Argentinian Islam. It's relativizing an absolute conception. And actually for us, Gaudiya doesn't only has to do with Goda, the area Goda, but sometimes comes from the root gur, which is coming from the sugar cane that there are a lot of there in Bengal. So the point implication is sweetness. Gur, these preparations coming connected to the sugar cane, having to do with sweetness, having to do with Madhurya. And Goda is the land where that Madhurya is being very nicely experienced and distributed by Mahaprabhu. So Gaudiya Vaishnavism has to do with Madhurya, not a geographical designation. And it's not different from Vrindavan nowadays, which is the land of Madhurya itself. So Guru Maharaj goes on to explain that in the same way that the sun and the moon rise in the east, Udaya implies that direction, the eastern direction. Light arising in the east, the direction of the gods, he mentioned. And on the other side, the Madhurya, that will be Aishwarya, if you will, the gods, knowledge, light. And Madhurya, human-like sweetness of Krishna, in his Aprakat Lila looks, as we know, ordinary, mundane, looks prakrita, but it is actually godly to the extreme, Guru Maharaj will say, prakrita. So Goda has to do with Gur, with Madhurya, with the sweetness, and Udaya represents the eastern direction, the Aishwarya. For example, the Sannyas Lila of Mahaprabhu in Puri, which is representative of Dwarka, which is imbued with an Aishwarya which we do not find in Nadia. So in Gaur Lila we find this. So Guru Maharaj concludes mentioning that when he who is all majestic appears as if ordinary, this is truly sweet. In other words, when Aishwarya properly mixes with Madhurya, then we can speak of real sweetness. When the two sweet gods, going back to the pranam mantra to Gaur Nityananda, Krishna Balaram, when these two gods appear as Krishna Chaitanya and Prabhu Nityananda, there is something more added to their sweetness. We have Madhurya for sure, Aishwarya in the background in order to be Madhurya, and of course the Audarya Leela of Sriman Mahaprabhu, Sri Nitai Chant. So, going back to the verse, here Bhishmanath in this first section that we are sharing today, he concludes this after making this brief recap about the topic he has been sharing Vaidhi, Raga, Aishwarya, Madhurya, and so on. He concludes saying the philosophy of Swakiya and Parakiya Bhav has been elaborately explained in my commentary on Ujjwala Nilamani. So Vishwanath's commentary is known as Ananda-candrika. And of course, he's not specifying here more about that. He's just mentioning that. But he will develop this point in the next sections, in the last part of this verse. So I won't speak about this further now, but in some minutes. So at the end of today's class, we will present his real intention, if you will, of why he mentioned this point here about Swakiya and Parakiya. But next, in the following sections, he starts actually to unfold his idea, his real intent behind just mentioning about Swakiya and Parakiya. And simultaneously, he's continuously making some recap of other topics which were already presented inside of whatever he already mentioned as a recap, the first illumination. So he will continually, next we'll speak about how through worship in Madhurya Rasa with different conceptions, there will be different corresponding destinies to be attained. Again, we already spoke about that, but time for some recap on the part of Vishwanath Chakrabarti. So I'll share the next section with you, and I'll read it. It says like this. By performing bhajan of Radha and Krishna in Vidhi Marg, or Vaidhi Marg, one attains Aishwarya Gyan, which does not differentiate between the moods of Swakiya and Parakiya in Golok within the realm of Mahavaikuntha. So here starts to intuit about the idea of Swakiya, Parakiya, as you say. If by being greedy for Madhurya Bhav, one performs bhajan in Vidhi Marga, then as Sri Radha and Satyabhama are one, the sadhaka becomes an associate of Satyabhama in Dwaraka, in the mood of Swakiya Rasa, which is a blend of Aishwarya Gyan and Madhurya Gyan. And when one worships solely on the path of Raga, one attains pure Madhurya Gyan and the position of an associate of Sri Radha in the Parakiya Bhav of Brajabhumi. So remember, he mentioned in one point of the treatise in the first section that his main focus will become Anuga Bhakti. Like whatever he's presented, that's mainly in the perimeter of Kamanuga Bhakti, of the type of Bhakti that mainly the Sampradaya is bestowing, the experience of the servants, the maid servants of Sri Radha. But of course, we try to make it broader, as you know, in our presentation. But in that context, here Vishwanath is presenting a successive order of worship, if you will, required to attain specific sadhyas, specific goals, attainments. All this in the context of romantic love, as you can see, Madhurya. Madhurya, in this case, not applicable to the intimacy of Braj in a general way, but to romantic love specifically. And again, he's doing this to compare one with the other in order to establish the rarity, the extraordinariness of attaining the seva of Sri Sri Radha and Krishna in Braj. In this case, in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, of what we may call specifically regarding what Gaudiya Sampradaya gives in this connection, Manjari Bhav or Radha Dasyam or Bhava Lasarati, different names for the same attainment. So he tries to make this successive comparison to present how unique is that attainment and how that attainment can only be obtained through Raganuga Bhakti, which is the main topic of the whole book, Raganuga Bhakti and its corresponding goal, and how those goals in Braj, whether it may be Kamanuga Bhakti, Priyanarma, Sakya Bhakti, whatever, it can be only obtained through Raganuga Bhakti. We can only enter to Braj to Raganuga Bhakti, to the specific section in Braj, especially that we're after. So he makes in this way a recap of some points that he already mentioned before. We go for this to a recap of the first section of the whole book. So we can recall that. He mentions first that those who worship Radha Krishna in Vaidhi Marg, with attachment to the elements that characterize the Vaidhi Marg, they will attain some form of Aishwarya Gyan, which won't discriminate between Swakiya and Parakiya. And Swakiya means married status between Radha and Krishna, and Parakiya means relationship of paramours, paramour love. So those who worship in Vaidhi mark naturally invoke a type of Aishwarya Gyan, which won't allow one to see a difference between Swakya and Parakya, and they will attain thus Radha and Krishna in the majestic atmosphere of the Golok. We spoke about that one day, like the outer petals, if you will, of the lotus of Golok Vrindavan. Not the antarmandal, the inner section of the Gokul, of the Golok called Gokul, but this section of Golok called Golok. There is a Golok in Golok, which is the outer section, and the Gokul in Golok, the most intimate section in this Mahavaikuntha, in this transcendental realm. So we already spoke about that there's a possibility of arriving to that place if our Raga Bhakti retains certain prominent elements of Vaidhi mark. On the other side, he gives another option, which also was mentioned before, that is when someone takes shelter of Madhurya Bhav, will like to experience romantic love in connection to Bhagavan, but in Vaidhi mark fully. So there is a slight difference regarding the previous one. The previous section has more to do with aspiring to serve Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, but being affected by certain elements of Vaidhi mark, even though Raganuga Bhakti is there. Here, we are speaking about embracing Vaidhi mark fully and not specifically wanting to go to Vrindavan, but want to experience romantic love. So you cannot experience that in Vaikuntha, even though you fully practice Vaidhi mark. Vaikuntha, Madhurya Bhav is not available, only for Lakshmi. So in that case, that devotee, this was also the point made by Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he makes this comparison in the same way that Radha is Satyabhama in Dwarka, that devotee will become an associate of her. They will, in other words, will enter into Dwarka and become assistant of the queens there in Swakya Bhav. In Dwarka we have Swakya Bhav, married relationship between Krishna and his queens. So this will be a Madhurya mixed with Aishwarya, already mentioned before as well. And finally, his real point in all this, by making all this hierarchy and comparison, he says, when one is worshipping in pure Raga Marga, without admixtures of Vaidhi elements, then one will attain the position of an associate of Sri Radha, specifically in Braj, Saki or Manjari. Again, we have to remember that there are two types of Kamanuga Bhakti. You can be Sambhoge Chamaya Tat Tat Bhave Chatmika, ones who may have direct relationship with Krishna and may take the position of a Saki, or those who may just want to serve the Naika or the heroine, in this case Sri Radha, and will take the position of a Manjari. So these are the two varieties of Kamanuga Bhakti, and of course mainly Gaudiya Sampradaya has to do with the latter. So in this way, the conclusion of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur here is that whoever wants to attain basically the Jugal Seva in Braj, the service of the Jugal of the divine pair, Sri Radha and Krishna. Again, his main focus is Kamanuga Bhakti, try to remember that, but we can extend this, of course, statement to whoever wants to attain any other position of service in the Braj will need to adopt this specific method called Raganuga Bhakti, the main topic of the whole book. And of course, we may add to that person will need to study this particular book, Raga-vartma-candrika, which very nicely illuminates on the nature of the path of Raga. So, well, after further developing his point and concluding here on the supremacy of Parakya Bhav, if you will, Vishwanath now will finish this 6th verse by returning to what he meant again in the previous section that we shared today, when he said, when he spoke briefly about the difference between Swakya and Parakya and how he dealt with that in his Ananda Chandrika commentary to Ujjwala Nilamani. So he will finish this 6th verse and this section, whole section of the second part of Raga-vartma-candrika, establishing how Srimati Radharani, according to his particular view, of course, how Sri Radha and the gopis in Vrindavan are actually in Parakya with Krishna and not in Swakya in the dynamics of the Lila. So I'll share with you the last part of the verse that we will share today, and we will spend some, one second, we will spend some extra special time in this connection today. So it's there in the chat, and I will read for you. So Vishwanath says, although Srimati Radhika is Sri Krishna's own pleasure potency, and Sri Krishna is also Radhika's very own Sakya Jana, her own property, it is nonetheless one's perpetual duty to meditate on Sri Sri Radha Krishna along with their pastimes, never only on Radha Krishna without their pastimes. But within these pastimes, none of the scriptures revealed by the sages have mentioned the marital status of Radha and Krishna in Brajabhumi. Therefore, Sri Radha has a parakiya, or extramarital relationship with Sri Krishna, both in the prakat, earthly, as well as in the aprakat and manifest pastimes, not swakiya. In this way, the essence of all topics has been briefly described here in this text. So here Vishwanath concludes his 6th verse by, again, going back to what he mentioned briefly in the first part that we shared today about Swakiya and Parakiya, and being very clear about his particular subjective statement and how that vision is shared by most of the rest, but all of the other sages. Of course, we will see some thorny topics in between in some minutes. But well, mainly he begins, interestingly, this section by describing that Srimati Radharani actually is Swakiya in regard to Sri Krishna. In which sense? She belongs to Krishna. She says, Sri Radha is Krishna's own pleasure potency. So Swakiya means belonging to someone else, one's own. And Parakiya means not belonging to that person, basically. So interestingly, he shows in which sense Sri Radha is Swakiya and in which sense she won't in relation to Sri Krishna. So here Vishwanath first is describing Radha is Swakiya. She belongs to Krishna. She's her very own Ladini Shakti. Now, Shakti Mam in more abstract terms, because we need to get abstract before jumping into the Leela and Rasa world. In abstract terms, technical terms, metaphysical terms, Tattva Siddhanta, Krishna's Shakti Mam, Sri Radha's Adi Shakti, Swarup Shakti personified, Ladini Shakti, however you may like to call. So intrinsically they have one belonging to the other. So Sri Radha is Swakiya in related to Sri Krishna as his Ladini Shakti, and Krishna, Vishwanath mentions, is also Swakiya in relation to Sri Radha. He belongs to her. He feels like that. He only moves around the circle of her influence, mainly, if you will. So no difference in one sense between the Shakti and Shakti Mam. This is one side of the equation, Achintya Bheda Abhed. So we have the Abheda side, the non-difference between Shakti and Shakti Mam, one belonging to the other. This is the technical side of it, the Tattva side. But on the other side, we have the Leela or the Rasa consideration, Tattva Vichar, which will give rise to differentiation for the sake of loving exchange. But it's important, equally important, to understand this unity between these two sides of the Absolute. So, after stating this main point to begin with, stating the Tattva side of it, and Swakiya in that context, Swakiya in connection to Tattva, now he will move and say that in worship, beyond mere theoretical definitions, in worship, in worshiping the form that it takes in practice, Radha Krishna Lila, Radha Krishna are to be worshipped again, not as mere like energetic abstractions, but within the dynamics of their pastimes. Not just, okay, she's Shakti, she's Shaktiman, they belong to one another, they are one. That's not the all of the whole equation. No? They are to be worshipped in the form that how it plays out in the context of Leela. They cannot just be worshipped, let's say, as a mere theological truth, in that abstract way, because the goal of the worship for someone in the Raga path, the goal of worship is to attain service to them within the eternal stage of Leela, of their pastimes, not to worship eternally them as mere, in our mind, in a theoretical way, as mere metaphysical principles energetic abstractions, but to, again, enter into the reciprocal dynamics of the lila. So that's how we should conceive of them when worshiping, addressing them in our worship. So that's why Vishwanath defines such meditation as one's perpetual duty. That's eternal aspiration of the Raga-vartma. And to work, as we are trying to worship them now, eventually that worship will turn to perfection and we will be able to continue worshiping them in the most perfect way in Golok. So having made this point about the ultimacy of the Lila, of the Lila in itself, where this diversity appears, this Bhava world appears, then Vishwanath will continue with his next idea, which is when we look at the pastimes, which again represents the supreme truth, the higher mode of worship that we aspire to enter, in those pastimes, we always see that Radha Krishna exhibit Parakiya in Lila and not Swakiya. They exhibit Swakiya in the Tattva side, in the abstract conception of one belonging to each other as energetic and energy. But when that Tattva plays itself out in the form of Lila, we will see that in Lila, Radha Krishna exhibit Parakiya. So as far as pastimes are concerned, Vishwanath mentioned that actually there is no scripture revealed by any rishi. He mentions rishi means like a seer of truth, basically. Seer, yeah, just say seer in English. There is no scripture revealed by any rishi or seer that describes Radha Krishna's pastimes in Braj as wedded pastimes, whether in the Prakat Lila as well as in the Aprakat Lila. And for the ones of you who feel, yeah, there is something, hold on some minutes, I'm going there. I'm just sharing what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is mentioning here, and eventually we will embrace the Purva Paksha, the arguments. So he's mentioning in both, there is no description in Shastra, books written by sages about Radha Krishna Lila being wedded, marital status, Swakiya, nor in Prakat Lila, in the earthly pastime, nor in the Aprakat, unmanifested. But someone even may say, but without going to Jiva Goswami, which maybe many of you may know, it's the main point here. Someone may say even, but there are some descriptions in the Shastra speaking about the weddings of Radha and Krishna. But actually, according to Vishwanath's statement here, it is implied that we should think of those marriages as Parakiya, as something that takes part in the context of Parakiya, not Swakiya in every single sense of the term being played out in the Lila. For example, a marriage may take place when the gopis want to joke with Krishna. It is said that once, while Krishna and the gopis were engaged in sitting and joking with each other, Lalita went behind Krishna and Sri Radha, and she took the ends of their clothes, their pitambara and her skirt, and they tied them together, like it is done in the marriage ceremony. And then Visakha began to utter mantras, like one recites in the yajna during marriage ceremony. And the gopis began singing different marriage songs that are there. So the gopis told Krishna that you should do like this and like that and follow these procedures in the ceremony and circumambulate here. So everyone there was totally satisfied and pleased. But again, this is like a narmahasya, like a joking pastime in the intimacy of Parakiya Bhava, like a play marriage, if you will. To say that also Brahma once as a priest performed the play marriage in Bandiravan in Vrindavan also. But there are play marriages. Now, this is in particular context, and it could be said that these play marriages that appear in the Leela, in the context of Parakiya, have two purposes. The inner purpose, of course, is to the nourishment of Parakiya Rasa, in one sense, the main purpose, Swarup Lakshan. And the outer purpose is to close, let's say, the mouths of those unqualified to deal with these issues. For those who will criticize Parakiya Rasa, thinking that the paramore love of Radha and Krishna is something immoral, by just thinking about paramore love in this world and projecting that there, for those persons, because of these play marriages, one could say, okay, they were married here. It was not paramore love, they were married. So to calm the minds of such extreme moralists, if you will. So in connection to this second reason and this point, we will go speaking about Swakiya, no? That someone may say, okay, this was actually, yeah, they were married, but mainly as a teaching strategy, not as the ultimate truth in the Lila. In this connection, we have to share Jiva Goswami's presentation. Vishwanath is not speaking here about that, but he spoke about that in his Ananda Chandrika commentary that he briefly mentioned, so we will go there for a minute. So we'll share for a minute about Jiva Goswami's presentation and connect that with Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's explanation in his Ananda Chandrika commentary in connection to that. So we will close our lecture by spending some time. A little bit. Now this takes a lot of time, but I will try at least to share the main idea for the ones who don't know, who are not aware of this point, and share some ideas about what Vishwanath said in his commentary to Ujjwal Nilamani. So Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur wrote the Ananda Chandrika commentary to Rupa Goswami's Ujjwal Nilamani, but Jiva Goswami also wrote his commentary to Ujjwal Nilamani called Lochana Rochani. So in various places of this Lochana Rochani commentary of Ujjwal Nilamani, Srila Jiva Goswami describes the Parakya Bhav as being only present in the Prakat Lila, in the earthly pastimes, but stating that in the Aprakat, there is actually Swakiya. So one may say, okay, so there seems some contradiction here, how to harmonize that? Why Jiva Goswami say that? So according to what Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur wrote here or implied here and wrote in a more detailed way in his own commentary to Ujjwal Nilamani, and actually he wrote another whole booklet or book, I should say, about this topic, apart from his commentary. His idea is that Jiva Goswami said what he said, basically to free the Sampradaya from, let's say, certain crisis at the time. Because there were some people who hold, as we already mentioned, who doubted about the supreme purity of the relationship between Radha and Krishna, and they were just expecting they should follow strictly Swakiya Bhav. That's the pure thing. That's the moral thing to do. Paramore love is nonsense and something like that. So in case that certain people will not be able to understand the deep purport of Jiva Goswami in this regard, Vishwanath wrote the Ananda Chandrika commentary. And that's Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's take on that point. No? He wrote his commentary trying to clarify what he perceived as Jiva Goswami's real intention behind what he said. So which was the situation at the time? Again, it is mentioned that Gaudiya Vaishnavism was, well, in one sense, in its budding stage, after a few generations after Mahaprabhu's descent, still was not recognized as a full-fledged sampradaya unanimously. So it is said that it was difficult for the general population, or even it is said by some disciples of Jiva Goswami himself, which were considerably qualified, as you may imagine. But for some of them and some other people in general, it is said that it was difficult to understand, and Vishwanath mentioned this. It was difficult to understand and accept the possibility of paramour love between Krishna and the gopis. Because again, this is the highest thing there, but it's the lowest thing here in the material realm. So it's not an easy thing to swallow. That's a fact. So in order to harmonize this, it is said that Jiva Goswami, Vishwanath mentions, he wrote a mixed commentary to the Ujjwal Nilamani Rupa Goswami, mentioning on some sections Swakiya, but also saying some other things that may one think something else. And the main point, according to Vishwanath, is one verse that Jiva Goswami wrote, one verse in one commentary to one verse of Rupa Goswami, where, according to Vishwanath, Jiva Goswami was hinting in one enigmatic commentary to the verse, I think it's verse 18, to the first section of Ujjwal Nilamani. So there, what does Jiva Goswami says? I'll read it to you. He says, in this commentary, I write some things according to my own wishes and some things according to the wishes of others. Any conclusion that is filled with consistency from the beginning to the end is written according to my own wish. And that which is not filled with consistency from beginning to end is written according to the wish of others. Thus, it is to be known. So it's quite cryptic. You may wonder why he's saying such a thing. Jiva Goswami is pretty systematic in his presentation on so many topics if you read the Sandarbhas and so on. But here he hints at something, because you can also just not forget and skip this verse. So Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur mainly takes these words of Jiva Goswami, and he himself, eventually in his own commentary sometime after, he further clarifies this issue through his own commentary to this verse. So what does Vishwanath says in his commentary to this particular commentary of Jiva Goswami? He says, I pay my obeisances at the lotus feet of Sri Jiva Goswami again and again. His intelligence is deep like millions of oceans, and his conclusion is the nectar of his mercy. One verse written in the commentary to this verse, which clearly states his opinion, destroyed the waves of my doubts. Like implying himself, I may have been in doubt when reading why Jiva Goswami was emphasizing Swakiya here and there, and not only in the usual Nilamani commentary. But now he mentions there here, when I read this verse that he composed in this purport, everything was clear for me. So the point is, it's important to understand this. Vishwanath is glorifying Jiva Goswami. He's not trying to defeat him, contradict him. And superficially, it may seem so. For the uninformed reader, it may seem that Vishwanath's commentary to Ushwal in Lamanis, it appears that he had no regard with what Jiva Goswami mentioned regarding Swakiya, because there Vishwanath was arguing in his commentary with strong logic, like strong scriptural analysis against Jiva Goswami's claims that Swakiya is higher than Parakiya. And Vishwanath had to write powerfully in order to establish that, but it doesn't mean that he was against Jiva Goswami, that he rejected Jiva Goswami. On the contrary, actually, it is said, according to our acharyas, that he removed the veil, like was shrouding like the real intention of Jiva Goswami. And ultimately he was exalting Jiva Goswami for his genius in protecting the Siddhanta without alienating his like contemporaries. So in this way, it is said that Vishwanath established the glory of Jiva Goswami. But it is said that nevertheless, at the same time, but by doing so, Vishwanath had to endure a whole parade of criticism, claiming that he was deviant, whimsical, and like offensive towards Jiva Goswami. But if he had not stood up to all like of these, however, probably the Swakiya version will have prevailed as Gaudiya Siddhanta in the whole Sampradaya. So that's also a point regarding sometimes in history, some acharyas trying to take a stance and being criticized for certain wrong reasons and so on. So I introduced the topic here. I mentioned the main point that Jiva Goswami made, the main verse that he mentioned, that according to Vishwanath is the main way of understanding Jiva's real intention. So while the previous one is the main arguments again about Jiva's real intention and Vishwanath's stance, let's briefly analyze and finish our lecture today, analyzing some of the other points that Jiva Goswami makes in his commentary, and what how Vishwanath refutes, quote unquote, or basically explains, according to him, Srila Jiva Goswami's real intention in his own treatises. So, for example, Jiva Goswami will say that through Maya, and for the nourishment of some special rasa, there is only a belief in paramore love in the Lord's Prakat Lila. So it seems that Jiva Goswami gives that this is caused because of Maya, illusory thing. So Vishwanath will reply, wherever Jiva Goswami has used the word Maya in relation to Parakiya Bhav, that should be understood as Yoga Maya, not Maya Shakti, not Mahamaya, as we already explained before, Yoga Maya. And interestingly, he mentioned that because Vishwanath, Jiva Goswami is mentioning this idea of in Prakat Lila, Parakiya may be there, but as a magic arrangement. So Vishwanath will, but not in the Aprakat Lila. But Vishwanath says it's not Maya, it's Yoga Maya. And Srila Jiva Goswami himself, in his Gopal Champu 1.1.22, he mentioned that there's no distinction between the Prakat and the Aprakat Lila, like implying if there is Parakiya here, it must be there. Jiva Goswami in that verse of the Gopal Shampoo will describe the Prakat, Prakash, and the Aprakat, Prakash. Prakash means like manifestation. So he describes them, they're as non-different manifestations of the unlimited pastimes of Golok. Vishwanath quotes Jiva Goswami himself in this connection. He will then quote Bhagavad Gita, Janma Karma Chamedi Bhyam Ebam Deveti Tadvatahat, and so on, which mentions Krishna himself as saying, my birth and my activities, Janma Karma Chamedi Bhyam, are divine and transcendental, both my birth in this world and my Leela. And other quotes in the same direction he mentions. And also he mentions how Jiva Goswami again himself, in his Bhagavad Sandarbha, he has personally established all along the book how the name of Bhagavan, his birth, again, his activities, all of them are eternal. So the point is, if he exhibits parakya, that's eternal. And he proves there that the pastimes that pertain to the Lord's form, incarnation, birth, activities, associates are unlimited. Timeless manifestations of his internal potency, Swarup Shakti. So this is not something limited to a particular realm on earth and so on. And then Vishwanath will turn his attention towards the Rasa Lila, a very important section of the Bhagavad, where Parakya is clearly depicted. I mean, you cannot make it to be Swakya. It's clearly depicted. So Vishwanath will say, well, if the Rasa dance, if the Rasa Lila is illusory, then, as some people think that Jiva intended to say, if the Rasa Lila, whole Rasa Lila, the most important section of the whole Bhagavad, is a product of Maya, then how will we be able to prove the superiority of the gopis over the goddess of fortune? Because that's stated by Uddhava in the Bhagavad. Nayam Sriyangao Nitantarati Prasadam Saryositam Nali Naganda Ruchankutu. The gopis were embraced by the arms of the Lord, and that was a favor that not even Lakshmi received. So, and if the whole thing was an illusion, what to speak about this point? Uddhava himself, which was, as we know, and devotee with Ishvara Gyan, stated these verses. And also in the very beginning of the Rasa Lila, it is described Yoga Maya Mupasrita. Krishna taking full shelter in Yoga Maya in order to engage there. Not Maya, no Maha Maya, no Maya Shakti. And also in the context of the Rasa Lila, there is this famous verse as well, Vishwanath quotes, Napara Yam Nirabadya Samjuyam, and so on. Where Krishna is saying to the gopis, and especially to Sri Radha, your meeting with me is most pure and faultless in all respects, and I am unable to repay you for your saintly behavior. So Vishwanath further says, if the Rasa Lila is illusory, then the proof that is provided in this portion of the verse, which is like substantiating the excellence of the gopis prem, will be rendered baseless and insubstantial, basically. And it's a very important verse that we know gives birth, if you will, to the Gaur Leela as well. And in this same verse, also the quote is there, Jamava Jandurjara Geha Shrinkala, Krishna is saying to the gopis, which means you have surrendered to me in a very special way, cutting the indestructible like shackles of household life. So Vishwanath says this section also offers evidence supporting Parmal love, Rasa Lila supporting Parakya Bhav, and promoting that. So the point is that the Braja damsels, the Braja gopis served Krishna with exclusive attention in this way, leaving all behind, even family, husband, and so on. And also if the gopis, again, if we say, okay, but such dedication is a product of Maya Shakti, as some may think in connection to what Jiva Goswami said, if such a selfless dedication were only illusory and transient, then again, why someone like Uddhava, such a scholar, such a crown jewel of devotees, is pointing this quality of the gopis as the pinnacle of devotion? He's glorifying them in these famous 6 verses at the end of his visit in Vrindavan, and constantly glorifying especially the gopis' love, their parakya. Another argument that Vishwanath will present is that the names of Bhagavan, the Nam, are eternal. And for each of his pastimes, a specific name is designated. This is an important point. The different names of Bhagavan are connected to different leelas. And that's why eventually when a devotee advances in her practice, he'll be attracted to certain names that have to do with certain leelas which correspond with his her inner affinity. And the name of Bhagavan are eternal and are connected with certain pastimes. So if the pastimes are transitory, again continuing with the Rasa Leela, the Parakiya Leela, there are a name like Rasa Vihari, which is the name of Krishna connected to Rasa Leela, the one who plays Rasa, who enjoys Rasa Leela. This type of name will have to be impermanent. And if these were to be the case, the essence of the bhajan that one conducts through the chanting of those names will also become illusory and false. And further, Vishwanath mentions, if you consider the Lord's name temporary, that's actually namaparad. That's one of the 10 offenses to Srinam, to consider the holy name temporary, illusory, and so on. So we can see Vishwanath is making a pretty compelling case. And again, not arguing against Jiva Goswami, but trying to make his point. But let's analyze some brief extra arguments before finishing. Also, Jiva Goswami, in another section, he will quote many verses about how unbecoming is the position of a mundane lover. So again, this is his point according to Vishwanath. Now, he's not against Krishna being a supramundane lover, but he wants people to not be confused about thinking this parakiya is the same of our parakiya. No? So basically, according to Vishwanath, Jiva Goswami wants to protect ourselves from seeing Krishna as such a mundane lover. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he will quote Rupa Goswami in his Raga-vartma-candrika. So there is one section where Rupa Goswami is mentioning that it should be understood that whatever scholars have described as inferior about extramarital affairs between a married woman and her paramour applies only to mundane lovers, not to Sri Krishna and the gopis. So whatever is inferior is connected with inferior realm. But when we go to Krishna and the gopis, there's nothing inferior there, even if that takes the form of extramarital affair. I need to say that this same opinion of Rupa Goswami, this is also the opinion of Kavi Karnapur in his Alankara Kaustuv, for example. He mentioned the same point. So in this way, to say that the Upapati Bhav, or the mood of a paramour, for Krishna, the transcendental Krishna, and the Parakiya Bhav for the gopis, from Krishna to them, sometimes it is a play of words is there. This interaction is not a dusana. Dusana means defect, but actually it's a bhushana. Bhushana means ornament. No? So it has not to do with mundane faults, but with transcendental ornamentation. Dushana and bhushana. In another section, also Srila Jiva Goswami will quote different sections of the Shastra to prove, or where Krishna is mentioned as the husband of the gopis, apparently so at least. First, he will quote Gautamiya Tantra 223. He will quote Srimad Bhagavatam 3:33-35, and then Gopal Tapani Upanishad verse 23, which mentions that Krishna is the Pati of the gopis, or the Swami, depending the case. Pati and Swami, which sometimes, not always, as we will see, are terms that are translated as husband. So one may say, okay, there we have the Shastric proof, not even Jiva Goswami, but all the scriptures are saying Krishna is the husband of the gopis. There is Parakiya. So Vishwanath will go to each one of these quotes. So he will go first to the Gautamiya Tantra, which includes the word Pati. And he said the word Pati in the Gautamiya Tantra should be understood as Gati. Gati means like goal. You are my everything. You are my ultimate shelter. Not necessarily has to do with we are technically officially married. Regarding the Bhagavat verse 10:33-35, this verse Vishwanath says that also says in this verse, a famous verse, when Parikshit asked Sukadev Goswami how is that Krishna, the prince of Dharma, was dealing in such a way with the wives of other men. So Sukadev replies saying basically that not only Krishna, he says Krishna is the husband actually of the gopis, but he's not only the husband of the gopis, but Krishna is the husband of the gopis' husbands and he's the husband of every living entity. Sarvadehinam. So he's trying to make, again, a theological point, a tattva point there. Swakiya, there is Swakiya between Krishna and the gopis in the sense they belong to each other. In the same way that everyone belongs to Krishna. Everyone is married with Krishna in that sense. So that's in the Bhagavatam. And then the last verse, which is the Gopal Tapani Upanishad, there the word Swami appears, which sometimes is translated as husband, not always, but sometimes. And Vishwanath mentioned that the word Swami indicates here he who maintains and supports others and who is the enjoyer of all, implying Swami does not always refer to a husband. And then he continues presenting his point, saying if Krishna will be the gopis' married husband, then we have a term, for example, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which says Paradhara Bimarshana. Paradhara Bimarshana, in the context of the last chapter of Rasa Lila, verse 27, chapter 33. Paradhara Bimarshana means to enjoy with another's wife. So if Krishna will be already actually married with the gopis, that term will not arise, Vishwanath mentions. And also the Bhagavatam speaks here and there about the gopis' husbands, and not Krishna being one of those. And moreover, Vishwanath mentions, it is also stated, one second. It is also stated that the gopis never had union with their husbands at any time, but they did with Krishna. So in the Ujjval Nilamani, for example, this is mentioned 332. So that's mentioned. They did have union with Krishna, but not with their husbands, implying Krishna was not their husband. That's the argument that Vishwanath also continues presenting. And Rupa Goswami himself, he mentions this, our Rasacharya, he has written that in the resplendent mellow of amorous love, there are two types of heroes, as you may know, regarding this aesthetic theory. The husband and the paramour. The pati, in this case, husband, and upapati, or the paramour lover. And Jiva Goswami, again, going back to Jiva Goswami, he has written in the commentary to this verse that the hero of Dwarka, of the young woman of Dwarka, is called the husband. And in Braj, the hero Sri Krishna is the paramour of the young woman there. So Jiva Goswami himself gives that clear. Krishna is the paramour of the gopis there. And actually, Jiva Goswami himself is Vilas Manjari also. Manjariness implies Parakiya Bhav, basically, not Swakiya Bhav. So, just reaching a conclusion here, and a recap of what we mentioned here. Actually, there is Parakiya in Bhav. That's the point. When we say Parakiya Bhav, we never hear the term Parakiya Tattva. Because in Tattva, Krishna and Radha, Krishna and the gopis are Swakiya. They belong to each other. They do not belong to someone else, even though it may seem they do. It may seem Shri Radha belongs to Abhimanyu, but just something, an arrangement of Yogamaya to intensify the surrendering of the dedication in the context of Madhurya Bhav. So it is concluded by Vishwanath in this way that Parakiya Bhav, in Bhava means how they feel, their subjective experience of the whole thing. They feel, I belong to another. And that intensifies the whole Leela. That's the idea of Parakiya Bhav. But in Tattva, in reality, if you will, out of the divine illusion, they belong to one another. Because they are connected in between themselves. Gopis belong only to Krishna. And Krishna belong only to the gopis, if you will. Until the other Brajavasis as well, of course. But gopis belong only to Krishna, that's a fact. So Parakiya is only in Bhava, in how they experience subjectively the whole thing. But in a metaphysical sense, of course, they belong to one another. But again, from the moralist type view, that may be easily misunderstood. There's a famous story, maybe you know it, from one nun in Europe that took the devotees to court, like denouncing that they were worshipping an immoral god. And the devotees went to court to argue with her. So she was presenting all these quotes from scripture that present Krishna as a playboy, if we will, as a devotee, womanizer, and she was saying these people is worshipping a totally immoral God. And she spoke for hours and hours, and eventually the devotee had the chance to speak. And he said, I have only one question to ask the nun, and that's my only presentation, nothing else to say. So everyone was surprised. And so they say, okay, you can ask the question. So she asked the nun, you have a ring in your finger, right? And she said, yes. So what's the meaning of that ring? And the nun was not answering in the beginning. So the judge asked the nun, you have to answer the question. So the nun say, okay, the meaning of this ring is that I'm married to Christ. So the devotee said, I have nothing else to say here. Only the point was, if one nun was meant to cry, but there are so how many thousands of nuns are in the whole world, and all of them are married with Christ. I mean, Christ is a bigger womanizer than Krishna. And of course, that's not the point. We are not implying that. The idea of being married with has to do with belonging to. So mainly that's the idea in this context, as Vishwanath presents Jiva Goswami's point. He emphasized Swakiya in Tattva, and Jiva Goswami is the Tattva Acharya of the Sampradaya. So his main specialty is to pound the post of Tattva, and in Tattva he made it clear they are in Swakiya, they belong to one another, and especially in order for us not to be, again, misled. So Jiva Goswami has favored Swakiya from the perspective of Tattva, whereas Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has supported Parakiya from the viewpoint of Bhava, of Rasa, how they experience that in Lila. But again, for the ones who, for the Swakiya Vadis, if you will, as we mentioned before in this section today, in Goloka there are infinite chambers. This is called like prakostas. And in one of those chambers, in the outer section of the Goloka, as we already mentioned, it does give place for Swakiya, and they're Radha Krishna married in every sense of the term in the outer chamber of Golok. So that could be another form of harmonizing that point. There is actually Swakiya in one section of the Golok. So again, this is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's stance, and of course, the stance of practically everyone in the Gaudiya Sampradaya. Nowadays, most of the Gaudiya Vaishnava follow him in this regard. Bhaktivinoda Thakur also wrote a very detailed description of this topic in his commentary for the ones who would like to read it. His commentary to verse 37 of Brahma Samhita. Again, as I told you, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wrote the whole book about that. I have the file if someone will be interested. But also, we should say there are some few contemporary Vaishnavas who actually believe that Jiva Goswami implied Swakiya in every sense of the term, while also there are some other sadhus who lie, if we will, who are not fully sure about Jiva Goswami's ultimate intention, if you will. So also some time ago, Shyamananda shared with me some link of one exchange that was in the Tattva Vivek forum regarding this point, that there are some interesting and nuanced ideas and opinions in order to broaden the discussion. So if someone may like to go through that, I will share with you the link in this chat section now. I've shared there now. So for the ones who will like, you can continue expanding the idea there. But in this way, Vishwanath shares his stance, which is again the mainstream, if you will, currency in Gaudiya world today, even though there is place for some other opinions and their interesting viewpoints as well. So in this way, just as a concluding, where Vishwanath is closing here this topic that began from verse number 1 of this second section, he began speaking about, remember, Aishvarya, Madhurya, Mogdata, Sarvajñata. So from verse 1 till now, verse 6, he's closing this section here. And starting from the next verse, we have 2 more verses. The 7th one, which will be considerably long, and the 8th one, which will be quite short and like a concluding verse. So starting from the next verse, next prose, he is entering into the final section of the work of the Raga-vartma-candrika, and he will be starting to speak about some other topics. Of course, all of them connected to the idea of Raga Bhakti, but sufficiently different as well. So I will rest my exposition here. And of course, if you have any questions, we have some time for that as well.
I have a beautiful class, and really, yeah, something that I guess I've been, confused about myself, and it really a lot of clarity from the class. So thank you. And I just my question would be, if someone is really, very much influenced by there is no hierarchy in the spiritual world. So that would be probably somebody that would end up in one of those Swakiya Prakashas. Is that kind of the destination that we could, or would there be some way of them getting clarity on that at some point?
Can you present the question again, because the audio was interrupted here and there, and I was not fully able to grasp the idea. Sorry.
Yeah. Just in terms of practical kind of idea of someone who may really be very influenced, that there is no hierarchy in the in the apricot vila.
Yeah.
So for that person, would their destination likely be the Prakash, where there is Swakiya, and there, so as opposed to having it maybe rectify the idea that both exist?
Well, again, if we are of the stance that there is Parakiya ultimately in Golok Vrindavan, I should say that yes, the conclusion will be for the ones who are of the idea that there is no Parakiya and there's only Swakiya. From the subjective perspective of the one that thinks that there is actually Parakiya, they will say yes. They will end up in that section that will correspond with their conception, if we will, where they will be able to, because they think like that and they want that. There's a possibility of that prospect. So there's a particular section in the Golok waiting for them. So that, yeah, that will be the arrangement, if you will.
I guess the thing of just being a misconception, not maybe that they have a desire for that, but just being in a particular sangha that may emphasize Jiva Goswami's presentation.
Actually, to be honest, I don't know of any particular sangha which is emphasizing that. No, I know of some few individuals. I mean, only one, and not necessarily to give the name, but mostly you won't know it. But it's not like there are sanghas or groups that, at least that I know of, you may correct me, whoever knows of it, that actually are officially taking this stance. No, so there may be some few individuals here and there, and I wouldn't say that there will be, I don't know, there's a misconception, so they will be thrown off of the Golok or something like that. But if they think like that and they have good reasoning for that and they are sincere, eventually, I don't know, they may have another insight, or they may end up in that section because they will like to experience that, basically. So yeah, it's pretty individual how everyone will go through that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Very, very important class.
Thank you. So,
Maharaj, sorry. I have a follow-up question on Arjana's.
Give me one second, Lalita Saki, that I have two messages here of two people that say that the link to Facebook is not working. So I'm wondering maybe if the link is not working. I mean, I'm trying here now in my own computer, and for me, it's working. So I'm sure that it's not working because you have to be a member of the group. Because if you are not a member of the group, for sure you won't be able to go to the chat. So please try to ask for membership, and that will be accepted hopefully later today. And you can try again with the link, and for sure you can access that. Sorry, that mention only. Go on.
Okay. Regarding Archana City's question, and the Prakash, wouldn't that devotee need to be following a Raga-vartma-candrika in that kind of, in order to attain that Prakash?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And do they exist? I guess they must.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure if I understood the question. You are asking if someone would like to enter which Prakash, the one that is the external Vrindavan, if you will.
Yeah.
So in order to reach there, one should follow a Raga-vartma-candrika. And the point is that I will say that actually the Raga-vartma-candikas that you will find in the internal section of the Golok are the same ones that will appear in the external section of the Golok. It's not that there are some other people there, but they're the same personalities manifested in a particular different mood. So the following of the Raga-vartma-candikas are, I mean, it's still there. I mean, it's not that Radha will be there and so the others will be there, but the way that it will function in the practical dynamics will be just basically different. But most of them will be there. Of course, this is a point that it has not been explained in detail, for example, because you may ask, okay, but in that sense, what about Rupa Manjari? I mean, Rupa Manjari is a Manjari, and thus she serves Radha and Krishna, Lalita, and so on in a particular way regarding the dynamics of Parakiya in the internal Golok. So which form will her service take in the outer petals? Because if there is Swakiya, they're only, I mean, how does it work? The Manjaris are no longer Manjari. Nobody has that, at least that I know of, enter into the details of that, because mainly that's not in our interest, basically in our Sampradaya. So the main focus is right to the internal section of the Golok, and there's a mention that other thing may happen, like a consequence of some mixing that is not actually advised in our Sampradaya. So the rest of the details are not addressed in detail. That's my point. No? But again, it's not that they are a total different scenario. It's still Vrindavan, it's still Golok Vrindavan. So we should be careful of not thinking it's totally different. It's like a Vaikuntha planet and there is nobody there, or I don't know what idea each one may have, but and I will say that most of the aspects are there, but in particular different manifestations according to the dynamics. So, but again, it's not the area of interest of Gaudiya Sampradaya, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That helps clarify.
Okay. Thank you. Someone is asking me which is the name of the group. The name of the group is Tattva Vivek. Writing there. In case you are not able to even ask for membership in the group, you can send me a private message, whoever. So, any other question?
Dandavat Maharaj.
Jai Pranam Brigupa.
So
You have a question?
Shall I see this question?
Yes. Can you repeat, because they all
I would also like to follow. I would also like to follow up on Archana Siddhi's question, because it seems that the argument that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is giving in this text about Jiva Goswamis having written some things inconsistently, it's not the best argument, because when we read Jiva Goswami's texts, Gopala Champu, the Sandarbhas, Madhava Mahotsava, commentary to Brahma Samhita, and so on, he's consistently writing about Swakiya. It's not something that he throws in one place, or two places. It really is a consistent presentation, and especially when we read Gopala Champu, he also has a very unique understanding of Goloka, which, yes, it's not totally different from that of the others, but it's quite unique. So to me, it's interesting that this really becomes the kind of marginal position then after Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And I'm wondering, what's your own opinion in this question? You didn't exactly give it. You kind of hinted at it, but I'd like to hear what your own opinion is.
Okay, I didn't want to become too subjective. I wanted to objectively and present Vishwanath's position in an impartial way. And yes, I agree that what, as you mentioned, that what Jiva Goswami mentioned was like consistent in one particular direction. Again, with the exception of this verse in the commentary to the Ujjwal Nilamani, that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur mainly takes as the main hint of what Jiva Goswami actually wanted. And of course, I know that some people may say, you are making too much of it. But of course, we could say also that Jiva Goswami is making too much of Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam by taking one line of the Bhagavad and developing a whole theology in that direction. But of course, he explains why he's doing so. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, of course, he's just picking one. He's not denying whatever Jiva Goswami says elsewhere, but he's taking this particular verse that actually, you see, it's only one commentary in one section in one book. But I mean, you have to embrace that verse. You can also just like skip that verse because it's not usual for him to say those things, that some things I'm writing and for my conclusion, because, and also you could say which is the topic apart from Swakiya Parakiya controversy that Jiva Goswami is speaking, giving some other opinion in order to satisfy others. Because if you go along his whole presentation, basically he's totally like in line, if you will, overtly with what the Rupa and Sanatan say before regarding any other topic of the Siddhanta. Whatever topic, Bhakti Tattva, Jiva Tattva, Maya Shakti Tattva, Sadhana Bhakti Tattva, Bhagavan Vishnu Tattva, whatever. I mean, so if he says some things I've said are my wish and my opinion, and some others are for satisfying the opinion on others, so naturally you will feel, okay, there is something. What's that topic apart from Swakiya Parakiya? I don't know of any other thing that Jiva Goswami have written that makes you think, oh, maybe he said that because of this, because this is not so much in line with what Rupa said. No, because all the other things are really chaste, if you will, and loyal to Rupa and Sanatan. So if you really play out the ultimate implications of that single verse, naturally, at least in my opinion, you ask my opinion, it boils down to this idea of Swakiya Parakiya. It's applicable to that particular point of his presentation. All the other things, he will not have needed to make that clarification that some things I said for me and for others, because all the other things are totally consistent with the previous acharyas and Guru Shastra. So I think there you have my own opinion. Even though I know that some devotees may differ, or as I said, they may be still like trying to harmonize that. And for me, basically, the fact that Jiva Goswami is the Tattva Acharya has to do a lot with that. No, he's the Tattva Acharya, and he has to pound the post of Tattva always, and especially regarding a topic that tends to be seen not too much in terms of Tattva, but it can be related to in connection to our mundane experience, lovers, and that in connection to God. At least for me, it makes sense that he made a big case, as you say, a pretty long and consistent case, trying to establish something else. So I hope that helps. But of course, I'm not close and sectarian to hear some other opinion. That's why I actually shared this particular link where Guru Maharaj is speaking with Shamananda and other devotees and sharing perspectives on different sections from other scriptures and trying to keep the dialogue in an open and in an ongoing way, of course. No?
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so someone shared the link asking if that was the link. No, that's not the link. Later, the one who is not able to enter the group for any reason, please write to me in private message and we see how you can get to this exchange. So we will leave here. Thank you very much to all of you for your time, patience as usual. and see you next Thursday. We will start beginning our 7th verse prose from this second illumination from Sri Raga-vartma-candrika. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Gaur Nityananda ki jai, Shri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Pramananda Haribo. Vanchakalpatarubhyashta kripa sindhuvya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Hari Bol.
Shripad